And we're back again. This is yet another lecture in this series of Flutter lectures. And the topic for today is input widgets. And there are quite a few of them because an important part of creating a user interface is to actually get the input from the user. And it's by no means a complete list. We'll have a look at some widgets like the checkbox and radio button, drop down, elevated, slider, switch, text field, list view, and so on. This is a subset of all the different available widgets for input, but it is in a way a good selection, I would say. Because when you know these, you could probably move on and understand any of the others. And there are plenty of them. Please have a look at the official documentation. We'll start this off by looking at checkboxes and radio buttons. The idea behind these is that you want to make a selection between a number of things, or with the checkboxes select several, because that's the difference between them. Checkboxes allow for multiple selections, while radio buttons only allow one selected option. And they can, of course, be styled in any way you like, but the material design versions that we have, they seem similar to how these are normally displayed. That is, with a square for checkboxes and circle for the radio buttons. They don't hold state themselves, but rely on the use of the onChanged method. Radio widget is a generic, so radio T, and we can use the checkbox list style or similar in order to give them a label and group them and so on. We will now have a look at an application using this. This one, my tried and trusted pizza order, where we can select between a deep pan and a thin and crispy pizza. And we have a selection of toppings, olives, anchovies, pineapple, mushrooms, and we select pineapple and mushroom, and we place an order. You have ordered a thin and crispy pizza with the following toppings: pineapple, mushrooms. Yeah, sounds legit, since olives and anchovies are disgusting. That will be in the test. Sorry, there is no test. What do we do then? Well, this contains quite a lot of stuff, really. The main part of this, we have the starting part, of course, but the main part of this is in the pizza order, which is a stateful widget, which then has a state, as we can see over here. It starts off by setting the pizza crust variable to deep pan. We have two selections, deep pan and thin and crusty. We'll set it for deep pan as the initial state. In order to have these checkboxes where we can select several, we have a map of string and boolean values called toppings. We give them the string value, olives, anchovies, pineapple, mushrooms, and we give them false to begin with, because in this case we don't need any default. Think if olives was a default. Horrible. Following that, we have the order summary, which is the text that you will see down here a little bit later. The work of this application is done in the place order, a private method that simply seeks to set the order summary into something. The place order creates a selected toppings list. We do it like this, list string, but as we know what it's going to be, we could have made that a little bit easier. However, we want to make sure that it's only strings. And for each entry in this toppings that we've created, toppings over here, we set the values. So we add entry key. And then we have, so when calling this, we check which of these are set to true, because we check the entry value. If it is true, then we set it to the key. So if pineapple and mushrooms are true, as in the example, those will be added to the selected toppings. And in this set state, we set the order summary to you have ordered a, and then the pizza crust, and then using join in order to join with a comma, so creating a comma separated selection here, or list, sorry, output of the selected ones. That's the logic of the application. The rest is actually just building the user interface. And it seems to be quite a lot of code, but it's actually fairly easy to follow. We start off with some padding in order to get it to look a bit centered inside of this, not onto the edges. Then we have a column for all the stuff that's going to be here. And then the first one, select crust, is this one over here, with a specific style like this. And then we have a row for the crusts, and these will be the part over here is where we set a radio button and a text. So in this case, we create a child for the row, which is a radio, this one. It has a value, sorry, deep pan. It has a group value, pizza crust, which will make it the same value group as down here, the thin and crispy. When we change the value, that could possibly be null. It shouldn't be actually, since we set it to begin with, but it could potentially be. We set the state, and yes, I know. I said in a previous video that we shouldn't do it like that. We should call a method in order to do that. But in order to not create very, very long listings, we've cheated a little bit. So we set the state over here, pizza crust, to the value. And the value is, in this case, deep pan. After that, we have a little sized box in order to get a little space. And then we have, oh, sorry, this space over here. And then we have the text deep pan. And thin and crispy works exactly the same. Let's just see. And we then move on to the toppings. And the toppings are created inside of first we have the select toppings, which is a column. It's just placed there in the column that we created previously. And then we have a new column where we create this entries map. So the children for this one will be, and this one is from here down to here. It will call this entries, which will basically iterate through all the entries that we have in toppings, in this case olives, anchovies, pineapple, mushrooms, and create a row for each of them, one of these rows, with a checkbox, an entry value, and this entry value is from the map that we have. And then on change, we again set the value, because checkboxes has a value. Now it's false, and now it's true. And we set this value by just setting the state for the topping. The toppings in this case, as you remember, is the variable that we have over here. Toppings, here, toppings. So in order to do this, it goes through and creates a checkbox and a little size box, and then the text, olives, anchovies, and so on, like this, and ends it as a row. And this is important in order for us to actually have this as then rows. We need to make it a list, so it creates a list for it over there. And with that, we have created a rather generic way of showing all of these different ways of doing it. The toppings to add values to this. So it's easy to add another one. Could be, I can't remember anything else we can have on a pizza. It should be simple. Ham. So if we would like to add ham, we just add a value for that in our toppings over here, and it will still work. After that, we have the elevated button, as we've seen before. Place your order, and that's the text, place your order, and when pressed, it should call the place order, which did all the logic that we saw previously. And in order to print this out, we have a text just beneath over here that takes care of that. So while it looked like quite a lot, it's not that bad really. And as I said, it's in this case fairly good division between the logic and the UI. And with that, we can return, and we continue with the slider, which is a much simpler. We'll return to the more complex in just a sec. But the slider is a more simple one, and we'll just show a very simple example of it. It makes it possible to create a slider where we can select a value by having a handle which we turn to left or right. It's possible to do up and down as well. We have the onChange method, just as we've seen previously in the text field. And we can set the max and min values for these for the range and get the value by using the value. And we'll look at an example. Over here we have the example where we can slide this handle backwards and forwards between -100 plus 100, and somewhere in between we have the value 0. And if we have a look at the code, it again is of course a stateful widget, and in this case we actually put the final string title over here. Sorry. And what we do next is to create the state itself using the build, where the title will be Flutter slider over here. And down here somewhere you will find a widget called slider. Above it we have a text, a normal text, so we just put a normal text above it, which has the text slider value and then the value to int, as the value will be a double to begin with, and it's styled. But here we have the slider, which we point to a slider value that we want to use. That's the slider value that we print over here. we say that the minimum value is -100 and the maximum value is 100. And then on change, we take this double value, and again we have a set state which we shouldn't really have down here, but in a separate method, but we cheat a little bit. But what it does is to set the value to the value that we currently have on the slider. So it basically copies the value onto the variable that we use in order to show the value that we have on the app, or the text, I should say. And that leads us on to the next one, which is a little bit more involving, but also very much like the previous ones. The drop-down button. The drop-down button is something that we can use to display a number of items. It should really not be more than 7 to 10 items, but we will cheat a little bit because I wanted more. It consists of two parts: the widget itself, which is the drop-down button, and then we have the drop-down menu items. And with that, we will move over and look at the example for this. And here we have the next example, which is a drop-down button example where we can see different Pink Floyd albums like this. So we begin, of course, with the pipe at the gates of dawn, but pressing this drop-down button, we'll see that we have plenty of albums, all of the studio albums actually. You've probably seen this one as well. You should have listened to it at least. This one is actually the best, and well, this one isn't too bad either. Actually, there's not a bad album over here at all. This one might be one of the least good, but they are all good albums, solid albums. However, what we are going to do is to look at the code for doing this. And it's something similar to what we've seen before, where we have a drop-down page, which is a stateful widget, which creates a state like this. And then we have the class drop-down page state, which actually does all the state management. And this works first by creating a list of strings for the images. So all of these images are stored, which means that yes, we have them placed over here in images, and yes, we have updated pubspec YAML to point to these images. And we see that we have the search path for all of these. And then we also have a list of the strings of these, so that we can see animals here and not animals.jpg. We start off by selecting one image, and we do that in the initial state. And since we cannot do that without having this selected image possible to reach outside, we need to set it as possibly null. However, we know that we will always initialize it with init state and set it to the first image. And the first image, if you don't remember, was of course the pipe at the gates of dawn. And then we build the user interface with the usual stuff: scaffold, app bar, and then center everything with a column, where again we have in the column a widget return with this drop down, and in this case we have a drop down button, which is one kind of drop down, and we have the drop down menu item over here. We start off with the drop down button with strings like the pipe at the gates of dawn or dark side of the moon and so on, and the value should be the selected image, And then we go through all the items as we did, like in the list we did previously for the toppings in the pizza. We go through all of them by starting from 0, going through the length of them, and creating a drop-down menu item for each of them with a value and a text. The value being exactly the image path, while the child is a text, which is the album name of this position. And on change, we change the selected value to this new value that we've selected. So we now started on change, but there it was completed. So it sent the index position of this value so that we know exactly which one it was. And with that done, we have completed the drop-down button, and we just add the padding that we want around this. So with that, we have this kind of nice, let's see, then that one is good. They're all good. That's all to it, actually, in order to get this as a drop-down menu or button. And that brings us to the next one, which is very, very similar, because if you do have more than, say, 710, you should really not use the drop-down menu. We use or button, sorry. And you saw that in that it was kind of too much. There were too many options. So you should use a list view in that case, really. And this makes it possible for us to scroll through a number of options instead of seeing all of them at once. And we can set a number of things to this, like caching or not, and it could possibly infinite, and we can build an infinite list and so on. But we'll keep it simple. And we can use the constructor, the builder, separated, or the custom way of the different methods then of creating the content for this one. And in its simplest form, it's quite like the drop-down button. So that's a good thing, because we will see that a lot of the things are actually quite similar. So let's go and have a look at a cool example. And here it is, the really cool example. We are going to look at some people in the Jedi Council. So over here we have an image, and down here we have the list view itself. And with a little luck, we can scroll up and down like this. Have a look at Mace Windu, for example. Shakti is really cool. And my all-time favorite, Caesatine, which is the man, really. One of my favorites in Star Wars. However, we are now going to look at the code itself. And it starts off very similar to what we've seen previously, namely that the Star Wars page, which is all of this, is a stateful widget, as we're going to have a state, and that it calls this create state with this class. Here it starts off basically in the same way as the previous example did, namely to create two lists, one of the characters and one of the images. In this case, I grow tired of adding images all the way down there, so I've added them later on. Again, we use we have this selected image, and we use the init state in order to set it to an other image, namely this Jedi Order that we saw in the beginning. Then we have the build, which looks like this, the normal stuff, and then we have two expanded widgets in this example. with centered on the first one, because I'd like this image to be over here with the same aspect ratio, but we'll clip it if it is too large. We check that the selected image isn't null, which can of course be done in other ways nowadays, but it's an older example. And then we see if this is true, that it isn't null, then we will display this image. Otherwise, we will have a sized box. All right, so that's basically it for that. However, on the other one, we have a separated list, and we can see the separations over here as little lines. This list view separated constructor, it has a list count which takes the length, because this will not be an infinite list, it will be for a specific number of items. And then we have the item builder, which will be the one actually creating the stuff. And it will return a list tile which checks on each of the different items. And we do that using the onTap. And onTap is actually a general kind of tap method. So we can tap on anything, but in this case we want to tap on a specific Kia Mundi, for example, and have that updated. And when we do that, we just say that the selected image should be from this specific index that we have right now, because we get that in the index builder down here. And then we want, as I said, since we have a separated, we will have a separated builder giving us a divider, and we can see the line which is the real divider. This kind of way of calling the constructor is for saying that we don't want to use the parameters. Just give me divider, because it doesn't have an empty constructor. It must be something, and then this will just return to us what we want. Namely, in this case, an empty divider. So this is a way just to return that. And with that, we get something like this. Yeah, really good looking, and kind of the same way, more or less, as the drop-down button that we saw previously. Next up is the switch widget, I should say, which is a simpler, easier little thing that just has two values, two states, true or false, on, off. It could be also undefined, that is null, when it will be set to off. But we really just want to switch between on and off. And we'll have a look at an example. And here we have the example showing the Pink Floyd logo, or not, by switching over here. I could also tell you that this logo, but inverted, is actually tattooed somewhere on my body. I won't say where. The example code isn't too much. We see that we have a state again, and this state in this case has this Boolean switch value set to false to begin with. That's why it looked like this when we started the application. We then have a widget over here which checks for this switch value, and if the switch value is available, it will display the image. Otherwise, it will just have a sized box. And then we have the switch itself, And again, value is then set to the switch value, stating that that is the variable we are working with. And whenever on change happens, when I press this one, the new value that we get is set to the switch value. And that way we can move backwards and forwards between these values. And this is something that's kind of good to have to switch on and off different options in a user interface. But it's not much more than that, so we'll go back and talk about style with our last part over here. Because what we've seen so far are all the different standard material design widgets that we have. And they are good. They look good. They look familiar if you've been using Android or if you've been surfing on any of Google's web pages and so on, because they try to make use of this everywhere they can. And that's also true for if you've been using Google Apps on, for example, the Apple devices as well. So you can use it just as it is, but it is also possible to style and tweak the appearance of the widgets if you like. We'll have a little look at the input decoration and outline input border and so on in order to create something a bit more, well, not something more than just the standard design. And with these little tweaks, you can get a design that looks very, very similar to what everyone is accustomed to, but with the little things that make it something special for your application. And in this case, we don't have anything special happening other than we print things into the console, but that's just because, yeah, that's because. And that is a good debugging strategy, but it is not a good strategy for your final application. But let's have a look at the example. And here is the example, a little grayish background, and we can see that this text field here has some rounded corners, I should say, and it says enter text. And if I put my marker there, we see that it animates up, and we can say something like, may the force be with you, and press submit on this button, which has a bit of a curve around the corners as well. And this actually didn't do anything, so if we just open a new terminal down here, we will see that output will be, oh, come on. Oh, sorry, debug. Submitted, and in this case it won't say, over here, submitted, may the force be with you. And it wasn't submitted down here because it didn't change. So if I put a little space there and submit again, and we can see all the things that happen down here, we have may the force be with you again. All right, looking at this, it's again a stateful widget with a state, style demo page state over here. Input text is whatever we put in here, and we see that this void submit here, which will be called whenever we input something, will just print to the console. Therefore it says don't invoke print in production code. No, shouldn't do that. But it does, and then it sets the input text to nothing again. All right. In this one, we start off by creating a background color, which is this little grayish shape. And then we have the normal padding and column and so on. And then we have the text field. which has an on state. Yeah, we've talked about that. But the interesting thing with this text field is that we are also using this decoration, and we make that an input decoration where we say that we will have a label text, enter text, which we saw over here, and it was inside of it before we started. A fill color, so the background color here is white, and that's why we have a grayish background to actually see it, and it should be filled. And then we have an outline input border, which makes these little rounded corners with, it's says to be circular, but no border side, so it will look like this. Sorry. A sized box just to keep some space, and then an elevated button over here where we invoke style. On press goes to submit, but style has the style from in this case, a padding around it, and it has a rounded rectangle border, so that we get these rounded as well, with the same curvature as we had in the text box, so that it looks kind of the same. And this is what we get when we use these. But it's, as I said, a way of creating something that doesn't look exactly the same as all the rest. Are there more widgets? Yes, there are plenty more widgets. But we've looked at some of them, and the rest of them actually work more or less the same way as this one does. So if we have a look at the floating action button, for example, you will see that it looks kind of similar to what we've done already. So continue looking at the official documentation at Flutter, and you will learn and try out a great many more buttons. Oh, sorry, widgets, I should say, for all the different things. But that's it for now. So I just say, have a nice time till the next time we meet again. Bye for now. Bye-bye.